This is Ralph Monroe, and I had the privilege of serving as a volunteer coordinator for the state and then special assistant to Governor Dan Evans. The things that I remember that were just amazing about this guy is that he always looked at the long haul approach. You know, he would be asking in the 1960s and 70s, where will we be at the turn of the century?
We have a great opportunity to re-examine, to reinvigorate, and to reform the great institutions of this state: social, political, economic, and educational, to meet our needs and to respond to our wishes.
So we had to deal with the enthusiasm of great economy followed by the challenges, the enormous challenges of real recession. But I think that looking back on the whole of the time I was governor, at least, it was really making progress on the environment, education in all of its aspects, because I was fortunate enough to be governor when we created a community college system, which we did not have earlier. We created a new state college with the Evergreen State College. We expanded the opportunities in higher education, opportunities and the challenges that we faced in civil rights and human rights were ones that, I think we made great steps forward, but that's a never-ending challenge.
We're being reminded of something we all very nearly forgot: the nobility of our American dream. To produce goods and see money returned back to the community are the things which made America great, her people rich, and her opportunity unlimited. There is no place in that society, no place in that dream for a closed society, for a system which denies opportunity because of race, or of the accident of birth, or geography, or the misfortune of a family. This nation must find a way for that to happen, and I believe that it can.
But both Dan and I were involved in recruiting what was pretty much the first generation of women in the legislature.
Early on as governor, that there were times when I had an opportunity to appoint someone to the bench in the Superior Court or even to the Supreme Court, saying, okay, we want to expand the opportunity, and there were virtually no women on the court, and look at the graduating class from the University of Washington Law School 20 years earlier. And there were, I think, just about 100 members of that graduating class, 99 white males, and 1 woman. When that's the group that you're really looking at for judicial positions, and pretty tough experience, and ultimately, we were able to reach out and make a change.
You know, we sort of forget the difficulties that we may have had in the past and remember our victories. But Dan took on the John Birch Society, had it expelled from the Republican Party. That was not an easy task by any stretch of the imagination.
You set up the first state commissions like on Hispanic affairs and African American affairs.
And especially with those commissions, it was important for me to listen, to hear what they had to say and what they could bring to the very big problems that they collectively faced.
Right.
We've come a long way, but frankly, from those days to today, discrimination is still a cancer on our community. The Republican Party, of course, was born and very shortly took leadership role in ending slavery and trying to end discrimination, and we shouldn't retreat from that now.
The thing that I really enjoyed about him was his individual concern about the little people, the people that had an individual problem that write to the governor or call the governor's office. How could we help them? Because he felt that they reflected something that was much larger. Maybe
the war in Vietnam ended rather abruptly with the collapse of the South Vietnamese government and Saigon being taken by the North Land, and the governor of California, then Jerry Brown, now governor again, said, we don't want any Vietnamese. We got enough problems in California. We don't want any more. And one of his staff members even tried to keep the plane from landing in California and to send it someplace else. I was furious, and I found out when I first contacted my staff, they were just as furious. I asked Ralph to go down to California to visit the camp where the refugees were staying in increasing numbers as plane loads came east. And I said, we ought to invite them to come to Washington. When the first plane landed in Washington and they brought the first group of refugees to Camp Murray, Nancy and I went up to greet them. You know, these are people, in fact, Nancy and I, after that ceremony, were headed back to Olympia. And I said, you know, I wonder how we would do with 3 young boys being transplanted 10,000 miles in almost any direction, landing with nothing more than the clothes on our back in a country whose language we could not speak and whose customs we did not understand. But we had asked for volunteers to act as sponsors, and that was a great turnout. That was the key, I think, to making it all work, because in spite of the fact that Vietnam was a very unpopular war, it was just ending and we were, in essence, losing the war, and yet we had thousands of people volunteer to act as sponsors. In fact, so many that there were a number of them that we just couldn't, there were more volunteers than there were refugees to sponsor. There have been several cases during the time I've been in public office where the intensity and the goodness of people themselves, quite outside of government or even organized volunteer groups, make a real difference. And this was a real case where that did make a difference.